There's a lot of chatter and so many questions. How short is GME? All we hear is that it's being short a ton of times. So we actually did the math. There's a website that showed all the transactions of GME since 2019. So if you backtrack every single transaction since 2019 and dark pools and everything, then they are you have for total longs you have 2.5 billion, and for total shorts you have 2.9 billion, and that equates to 440 million net shorts since 2019, or 570% of the float. Well, you could be saying, well, yeah, okay, well, they covered that during the first big squeeze, maybe. But Justin, let's go on to let's just track the data. This is just from after the squeeze. So after January 29th, 2021, if we go, they are still short 250 million shares, or 337% of the float. They could have covered a certain amount of this, but if this data is accurate, and we'll show you where we got this information. It was from chartexchange.com, and I'll put the link in the description below. If this is accurate, though, that means just since January 29 last year, they have shorted 250 million shares through dark pools or other various mechanisms. Justin, there are other ways to short shares, is there not?
There are. And so before we get to those, just to kind of reiterate that point, if we just assume that on the eve of the 28th of January last year, all the shorts covered, let's just assume that that's the case. And let's just assume since then, from the data that we've got right now, every long doesn't necessarily need a short, but every short must, at some point in time, theoretically be closed out by a long.
No,
which
but if not if there's volume. If there's if there's enough volume, you could turn $10 into 20, and that's what these shorts are doing.
Right, but what I'm saying is that sooner or later, the shorts that have been created, like they have to be settled with something.
Not necessarily. Not if the volume is there, but people are direct registering their shares, tightening up the volume more and more, which is going to make it more and more difficult. And this is not the only way that they're short. You can also make artificial ETFs that you can then short, which is not tracked in this at all. Let's say you add another 50%. It could be shorted 380%. I mean, these are just astronomical numbers, but we see the direct registering of shares. We see the call buying. This is what me and Justin have been doing, buying as many June contracts as we possibly can. And we're going to see what happens.
Yeah, and to go back and talk about the ETFs, so here's the thing, right? Like, I'm smart enough to know I'm not smart enough to know the various mechanisms, the various modus operandi, whatever, that these sophisticated people who I think are acting in bad faith are using to warehouse their short interest. Anyways, if you do, great, but I'm clever enough to know that I don't know. But that being said, I do know about a few of them. And one of the other ways that keeps coming up is the ETFs that hold GME. XRT is probably the big one that everyone's been talking about recently.
And that is openly short 715%.
Yeah, so just for that. So what does this mean in practical terms? Okay, let's say, for example, you're doing a road trip. You pull into a gas station in the middle of nowhere, and for whatever odd reason, like you have to have tomatoes. Okay, you just absolutely 100% have to have tomatoes. So you're going to the gas station, but you're at a gas station. And gas stations don't really sell tomatoes, but you really, really need tomatoes just for reasons. So you're looking around, and you notice that there's like a huge ass stack of Lunchables. And in these Lunchables, there's, you get your cheese, you get your crackers, you get your whatever, and there's like 3 little cherry tomatoes in that. So what do? You go and buy all the Lunchables you can get your hand on. You rip them apart just to grab the cherry tomatoes and throw away the rest. That's kind of what's going on, I think, in terms of the shares, or with the ETFs that are going short. If you are I believe the phrase is authorized participant, you are allowed to redeem your share of the ETF for the underlying stocks that make up the ETF basket. So that's kind of like opening up the Lunchable and taking everything apart. And so in this particular situation, I think what happens, and do not assume this to be right, but I think it's more right than wrong, with that little caveat out of the way. Suppose, let's say you go in and you sell short all these shares of an ETF, and let's say you sell it to yourself. So you create a short over here, but then you take the shares and put it into your other pocket. You then take these shares that you got by going short in the first place, and because you don't want the price of the ETF to go up, in fact, you want it to stay down. You take these, you then go to the person that created the ETF and said, hey, okay, listen, ETF, I want to redeem these shares for the underlying equities, at which point the entity that created the ETF will issue out those shares. And I think, although I'm not certain on it, those shares that are created, they don't necessarily have to be real shares. In other words, they can be something called synthetic shares, as in the person that created the share says, okay, listen, I promise within, say, 35, 40 calendar days, I'll get you the real share, but until then, you can use this as, to kind of stand in the interim. This is one of those ways that you can artificially increase the supply, and more importantly, you're able to manage and warehouse the short position, because now you can look at XRT and say, well, XRT is 750% short, but what you're really doing is you have to get these synthetic shares of GME to manage your GME short position and just keep that from blowing up. Again, I don't necessarily claim to understand the ins and the outs of it, but that's kind of how I think about it. And the last piece of the puzzle is this. Let's say that you've got 40 days in order to cover your ETF short position. So within 40 days, you have to give the ETF or the underlying basket of stocks to make a new share of the ETF back to the person who originally made the ETF. So going back to our gas station example, it's like saying, okay, you've got all these Lunchables that you've ripped apart, just to get at the tomatoes, but you then have to give the Lunchables back. So you still have the cheese, the crackers, and all the other stuff, but you're short the tomatoes. So what that means is that you've got to find another source to get the tomatoes. You've got to rob Peter to pay Paul. So maybe you find, for example, another ETF that has GME. You do the same thing, get the tomatoes from that, use those tomatoes to put them back in the first round of tomatoes, put the Lunchable back together and give back to the store. I am so sorry for the silly analogy. It's probably not correct, but I do suspect it's hopefully more wrong than right. But that's how I conceptualize it.
Yeah, and this is just speculation. We don't know what's happening. All we know is the data that we're given. And we don't know if this data is right, but you put the data that you have together, and these are the numbers that we got. Total since 2019, 570% of the float has been short. And that is what on the data.
Yeah, Josh, let me just put some numbers on that, too. What this means is that you would have to buy, if the shorts wanted to cover, for whatever odd reason, they would have to buy, let me see if I can do this right, every share 5 times over, right? Or like approximately 5.5 times over, right?
7 times over.
5.7. Yeah, almost 6. Almost 6.
Like that is, if there's enough volume, then you can cover that. So that is,
But there hasn't been the volume. That's the thing. Like, look.
There hasn't been, but that is since 2019. So let's just say they got rid of that completely. Well, this is 2019 to 2021 to 2022, wherever we're at. But after the first MOS, January 28th, if we look since January 29th of 2021, there has still been 250 million shares sold short. That means you would have to cover the float 3.5 times over. That is not including the FTDs that are being shorted. If this data is accurate, I have to stress this enough because we don't know, because there is no proof. We are just cherry picking and finding as much data as we can and putting it together. The next thing I would like to add is Robinhood. Robinhood is notorious, and they are getting fucking smushed. It looks like they could be going bust. Why? You put a few pieces together, use some critical thought, and it. Justin, why would you suspect? They're down 10% pre-market, right? Post-market.
Post, yeah. So
it's January 27th at 8 p.m.
Yeah. So it's more so like my sense of justice. One of my favorite phrases that I am deeply convinced that God is a sense of humor. Like, I firmly believe that I'll take that to my grave. But I note that just the company being named Robinhood, or GameStop being named GameStop, I kind of feel it's like God, giving us, a wink and a nod, or the simulation, giving us a wink and a nod.
I'm a atheist myself, but I do find it quite amusing. So we don't know what's happening.
Josh, sorry, let me put a bow on this thing. So, silliness aside, here's what I think might be going on with Robinhood, and this may be where you're going too, is that if, for whatever reason, Robinhood became a sacrificial lamb for, let's say Citadel, for example, when Citadel, whatever, let's just say that's the case, the people who might be acting in bad faith, who are trying to warehouse a GME short position, have to post collateral and have to incur a cost to carry and maintain their short position. One of the ways they might have done this is they might have gone incredibly short on Robinhood. In other words, the more that Robinhood goes short, the more that the short interest has value, or the more cash they can pull from it. Therefore, the people who've acted in bad faith, who are not only short GME but also short Robinhood, have this lifeline. That they have this slow trickle in, but even then, that trickle is getting less and less and less. And finally, what I'll say too is just the name Robinhood. If Robinhood going bust forces or basically collapses, otherwise impairs, the various exotic warehousing transactions the bad actors have done to hold their GME position, and that blows it up, like, that is just going to be...
Here's the deal. Here's how this thing's going to kick off, because if this information is true, then it's going to happen. But what is actually going to trigger MOS? We need retail. And this is... if this data is accurate, share this video. We want to be disproven. This is not for views. We just want to spread the message. Please, we just want to. If this data is inaccurate, show us data to disprove us. Everything will be in the description. We want to see where we are wrong because we would love to change everything. I would flip my mind in a second, but everything that I'm seeing is leading me to believe that there's potentially over 330% of the float being shorted. So disprove us or show us that we are correct, and let's find more information and put the pieces of the puzzle together. How is this going to kick off? You need retail to buy calls. This is what me and Justin are doing. We are buying out of the money calls in June, also direct registering shares, lowering the volume that they can actually use. This is just going to clamp them down until there's a absolute just rip. And that's what we are just ready for. So thank you guys. Justin, any last words?
No. What I would say is, frankly, right now, I'm just pissed. That is it. I feel like I'm rage buying the stuff, which is a horrible way to engage in investments.
I've been so happy these past few days because I just recently became a GME bull because I just realized Justin's been hammered down my throat for the past year. Just 3 weeks ago, I really started studying and get in on it. So, I'm a fresh newbie. I am absolutely loving the cheapness of these call options. I've been going for the June 17th 680 strike. I'm trying to rack up around 30 to 50 calls and just exercise all of them. When this thing pops off and you have these calls that start to become in the money, I think the best plan of action for the maximum pain and the maximum squeeze would be to exercise the calls, which is what both of us will be doing, saving the direct registered shares for the very end.
Yeah, and just to be clear, what that means is, let's say, just to keep my math simple, for example, let's say you have a call for $100 on GME. What this means is that you have the right but not the obligation to buy 100 shares of GME for $100. So when you exercise the call, you make a phone call to your broker. Your broker says, okay, great, 100 shares at $100 a share is $10,000. We're debiting your account $10,000, and we'll immediately turn and deliver 100 shares. This is a bit outside the scope of this video, but if you think about exercising your call, don't be afraid by the cash up front that's required because many brokers have options to get around that.
Okay.
So anyways,
this is some massive news. If you enjoyed, please leave a like and just share the video. Please, all we want is more people to see this because the more people that see it, the better chance that we can actually get the truth from the story. So guys, without further ado,